So in this little video of another one of Jay's projects, we're going to be tackling his AT&T caller ID boxes. So if you recall in my previous videos that one of the requests was to remove the relay, and that process right there is going to determine whether the rest of the project will proceed. And then the other wishes that he had was to change the new call LED to a RGB one, and also backlight the LCD display. So off camera, I have already completed 2 of these. So now the third one, I'm going to bring you along. So since this is the most ornate of the projects, I had to do some stuff to make sure that this is going to work. So, like I said, removing the relay is going to determine whether I'll be able to continue with the rest of the project, because if removing the relay doesn't do anything or disables the caller ID mechanism and stuff like that, it's basically a waste of time to try to even go and continue on with the rest of the project. So when I take this apart, of course, I'm going to get to the relay. So since I've already done this, what we're dealing here with is a masseuse relay, and we're dealing with the 9-volt variety. And we are also dealing with a 8-pin relay. So on the relay here, we got our 8 pins. So we got 2 pins for our coil, and since the system runs off of 9 volts, it's a 9-volt coil. And of course, with any relay, we got a normally closed position and a normally open position. So when this thing is just, standing here, sitting on a desk or hanging on a wall or doing whatever it's doing, the relay is in its normally closed position. So we got 4 sets of contacts that are, doing what they need to do to make the thing work. And then when this thing, when you bring up the option to, check for voicemails or whatever else this thing does, what it does is that it automatically picks up the phone line to do what it needs to do. So it goes from one set of points or contacts, and it switches to these outside contacts, these outside points. So we got our normally open, and then when the relay switches over, then it makes connections, and then it makes this normally, and then it closes the connection to do what it needs to do. So my thoughts were, and of course I've already done this, is that we pull out the coil, we pull out the whole relay, and then we jumper 4 of these contacts, or actually 2 contacts. So we're going to be putting a jumper between the normally closed positions on the board to mimic that the relay is in its standby status. So whatever this thing decides to do, if it does, because sometimes it would normally at random, and of course Jay told me this. He says that sometimes that these things would pick up for whatever reason, unknown reason why they would pick up, and then it would drop the call, and then whoever was calling would have to call again. So this thing powers up the coil, blah blah blah, makes the switches over contacts, and then does whatever it needs to do. So that was some of the homework I needed to do to make sure that this works. And of course, like I said, I've already done it twice, so I do know it works. So now we can put this off to the side, and now we can go ahead and open this up and start making stuff happen. So this thing is only held together with 1 screw, and then we can go ahead and start cracking this open. So we got the shell opened up. So I can move that off to the side. And then we got our little button bar here. Put that off to the side. And then we got this clear plastic case that protects the LCD. And then we got our little button bar pad. So we're going to pop this out of here. Move him off to the side. And now we can pull the main board out. Then we got our main board. So, over here is our little LED that we're going to be replacing in the near future. But our first goal is to take this relay out. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to flip this back over. But before I take the relay out, I need to take this whole display off, because most of the contacts are under the board here. So there's a couple of contacts just about under here, and then there's some underneath this plate. So now that I need to take this plate off, first thing I need to do is to pay attention on what direction these little contacts, or these little folded over parts are facing. So I'm going to be looking at this underneath the microscope so I can see which direction that these are headed in. So one thing I want to avoid, and that's the thing, biggest thing while I'm using the microscope, is to see what, because I'm actually looking in between the board and this twisted prong, because all these twisted prongs is actually what holds the display bezel on, and it also gives pressure against the contacts to operate the LCD. So for this one here, I'm going to be twisting this to the counterclockwise position until it's straight. So there's that one straight, because if you twist them the wrong way and give them a full twist, more than likely they're going to break off. So this is another one that's that one's going to be clockwise, that one's going to be clockwise, and that one's going to be counterclockwise. And then this one over by the fuse, he is a clockwise. Because if you twist these the wrong direction, like I said, more than likely these things might snap off. And like I said, this is a critical part. It holds pressure for the LCD communication, little ZIF line. I believe that's what it's called when you have them little strips for the LCDs. They call them ZIF lines, I believe. So now that should be able to pry this off the board. Of course, I'm going to be careful not to try to damage anything, because this thing has tight tolerances to make this LCD work. So I don't want to be just ripping things off the board here. I'm going to just very gently pry this metal bezel off the board. And of course, now I'm going to flip it upside down, because there is a spacer under there for the LCD. And there's the LCD. So this has a little plastic spacer on there to space it off all the couple of Xeniers and the blob on chip and various other little bits that are under there. So we got that, and here's the little communication line, the ZIF line, to run that LCD. So now the next thing is, now I can go ahead and take the relay out. So now we can go ahead and remove our relay. So on the board here, what we're looking at here, it's directly on the other side of the board. So here's our relay, and here's our corner. So we have our coil contacts here, and then there's a diode right here to curtail any funny business when the relay clicks out. So here's our 4 terminals, our normally closed terminals. So one set is a a constant base contact. It's always connected. And then we got our normally closed contacts, and here's our normally open contacts. So we're going to be desoldering all 8 pins and removing the relay. And then in place of them contacts, we will be putting the jumpers right where the normally closed contacts are. So we're going to be adding a little flux here, because it really helps on getting solder out of the through holes here. Because I would, the first time I did this with the first box here, I used the solder sucker, but the due to the age of these boards, and that thing is so aggressive that it does have the capability of actually removing the pads off the board. So I had one that was just barely hanging on, and I was able to actually tack it back down. So I says, the next time I did this, and actually the second board that I did this with, I actually used the solder wick to remove the contacts, and then the board pulled right out. The relay actually pulled right out, so it was pretty easy. See how nice it just pulls the solder right out of them holes. Sometimes the wick actually does better than the solder sucker. Of course, the wick combined with the flux, it's just like a vacuum. And our final two contacts, we're going to try to leave the diode in place. Of course, for me, I got to remember to keep you in frame, because when I look down the eyepieces, I have a lot wider view than what you see on screen. So like, for me, and really for you, the left, right of the picture is pretty much what you see. But the up, down is, I see a lot more of the board up and down than what you guys normally would see. So when I venture off, sometimes I don't realize that you're not in frame. So now we're just going to make sure that we have all these pins desoldered, so we don't have any rip outs. Not that it would rip out, because I'm going to be pulling it from underneath, but just in case. So this one's out, that one's out, that one's out, that one's out. Them are out. Just got to bend this one over so I can so it doesn't hook the board on its way out. Okay, that's out. Okay, now we'll pull the relay off the board, and it should just pop right out. Just like that. Nice and easy. So, for Jay, we'll be giving him the relays. Maybe someday he can find a use for a 9-volt relay. So now the next thing to do is, I've already verified this little LED here. And when I tested it on the board, when I had an earlier video, when I demonstrated you how many volts is on that LED, it had about 1.6. But I did discover that after I severed the LED, I get about the same voltage, or a little bit more voltage that would be required to run a RGB fast flash. So we're going to be pulling the LED off the board here and doing a little finagling with the leads here. So that'll be our next little step to pull the desolder the LED. So now we'll desolder the LED off the board. So on the board here, we got our little LED. It's right here. So this is our LED, and our legs for the LED are right here. So we'll put some more flux down. And we'll get some more wick. Doo-doo. So that should be just about loose off the board. So now, that little LED should pop right out. It just pops right out. So I know for a fact that the negative side of the LED is toward this direction. So we can get that out of the way. Okay, now we're ready to install a brand new 3mm fast change RGB LED. And then of course our LEDs, the long leg is the positive and the short leg is the negative. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to take the LED legs here and we're going to fold it over flat as possible toward the casing of the LED. So we got a nice 90-degree angle. And then we're going to insert it into the board where it would normally live. Now we're going to fold the leads where the holes are. So I'm going to stick a pair of tweezers under there. I'm going to kind of prorate where the bend's going to be. Pull it back out of the board. Fold the legs over to another 90 degrees. So now we got a little shape like that. And then we can finagle it and get it nice and perfect. And now we're going to insert it into the board. And it's going to drop right in. It's just ever so nicely. And now when we flip it over, there's our legs. So we can kind of flare them a little bit so it don't fall out. And now we can go ahead and solder that back in place. Now we'll solder our little LED back in place. And we'll restore that other connection that I desoldered to make my life easier. So now we'll just re-solder them 3 pads. Okay, that takes care of that. Now we can clip our leads. So we're going to be using these leads for jumpers for the relay. So here's our relay, and you can see the schematic right here on the silk screen of the relay. We got our coil here, and then our contacts for our normally closed position, and our contacts for our switched position. So these two look like the common pins that activate the switch, and then we have our 4 contacts here. So when this coil energizes, takes these set of contacts on each side, brings them over to the center for these contacts here. So now we're ready to restore our normally closed position contacts on the board. So we're going to be making up some jumpers. So I'm going to take a pair of tweezers here, and I'm going to squeeze them in, and I'm going to fold it over. So we make a right angle joint, and then we're going to go and stick it in the board. Like that. I'm going to take the tweezers and then see where I need to make my next bend. So right about there. Pull it out of the board and then fold it over. So now we have our own little jumper. And we can put that back in the board. So that's the one side. Now we'll just make up another set. So we have our little jumpers. So now we can fold them over so they don't fall out while we're soldering them. And now we'll solder them to the board. So now we'll solder our relay contacts, or normally closed contacts, back onto the board. Trim our leads, and then this little project is complete for this stage of the modification and blah blah blah. So that's that. Now we'll move on to putting the display back on. So now that we got our relay bypassed, our new LED in, now we can put the little display back on. So all I want to do is make sure that we don't have any contaminants on our little zip connector here, because the cleanliness and pressure is the only thing that makes a connection with the display board. So now we can go ahead and line up our little pegs here, making sure that we got everything all nice and lined up again. First we can do is straighten up the pins here a little bit. Make it go in easier. So now we can go ahead and use the microscope to twist it back the little locking tabs, so we make sure that they go in the right direction. So this one went toward the outside of the board. And then we'll do this one over here. He went toward the bottom, or toward them caps. So we'll make sure that we twist that in the right direction. And then this one went clockwise going up. And that one went counterclockwise. And this one went counterclockwise. And that restores the display back on the board. We didn't wreck anything. And there's our little LED. He's nice and happy. We got our little jumpers. They're all nice and happy. So as you can see, on this side of the board, you can only get to 1, 2, 3 pins out of the 8. So the other ones are under there. So that's the coil. And then the other ones are way in there somewhere. So that's one reason why the display has to come right off, because you can't get to them. Because there's our little jumpers. There's one set of jumpers there, and then the other jumper is right under there. So, not an easy task to disable that relay without taking the whole display off. So now that we got our display on, our little LED on, our little relay bypassed, or resumed the normal operation when it's not doing anything, now the next step is backlight. So on this particular LCD, it's not the type that you can put LEDs behind it and have it light up. It wasn't designed for that. and there's no room under it to sort of modify it, because you've probably seen there's a video on YouTube where a guy takes one of them Harbor Freight bolt meters and he puts a backlight under it. So this particular one, there's not enough room to do that. So normally on an LCD like this, the backlight is fed from the side right here. There's a notch and a clear spot for a light pipe, actually. So if this was designed to have a backlight, normally there'll be like a piece of acrylic here, you know, kind of like an odd shaped here, and there'll be like some sort of light source right here, you know, an LED, a little incandescent lamp, blah blah blah. But this wasn't designed to be backlit, so it was never put in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this little LED array that I made. So this is 3 35 by 35 28s that I soldered to itself. So these are going to be taking the line voltage coming in from the DC jack, which is a little over 10 volts, and we're going to be connecting to that to the jack here. So the back of the jack here has power, so that's going to be our positive, and then our ground, we're going to attach it here, and we're going to be using a 330 ohm resistor, because normally at first I was going to use a voltage divider, but I don't have a plethora of resistors to make the 10 volts, little over 10 volts, I think it's like 10.6, something like that. Even when it's plugged in, it's over 10 volts. So I need to drop the voltage a little bit to about, you know, like 8.6, something like that. So I sort of went on like an LED calculator, and then I put the calculator to work. I says I wanted to take 10 volts and drop it, you know, over 10 volts and drop it to about anything under 9 volts. So it came up with and I estimated that each LED is drawing about 20 milliamps, so about 60 milliamps, which is nothing really. So it gave me a calculated value of about 330 ohms. So what we got to do is we got to attach our little LED array here to the side of the case there, like that. So the only way to attach anything with that is to glue it. So we're going to be using this UV resin, and it dries clear. So I'll be able to just stick it right on there. I'll get my UV light ready to go. So we'll put just a tiny little amount on there. Just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. And then we'll put our little LED array on there. We'll just drop that right into the resin. And we'll position it where we want it. Like that. And then we'll cure it to the display board. Okay, so that secures that to the display board. So now we can do a little test here. And then really the only test is to make sure that I know which side of the LED is positive and negative, and I already did that. So there's a little black speck on there from a marker to tell me which side is which. And of course, the display lights up, as you can see. And of course, with the lights in the room, it doesn't look fantastic, but this sort of backlighting for this particular kind of LCD was never really much of a wow factor. It was just a little something to give you a little something at night. Nothing spectacular, and that's just the way it is. So now we'll hook up some wires, and we'll loop them to the back side of the board. We'll connect them to the DC jack, and we'll put this back together. So now we'll connect our wires to our little LED array here. So the first thing we'll do is we'll tin up the wires, and we'll tin up the pads on the little LED array. So now we'll tin up the pads on the little array board here, but I'm going to have to tape it to the edge of the desk. So we'll get some packing tape, and we'll physically tape it to the desk here. This is sort of an awkward board to work on, since it has big honking connectors on the back of it. And then we'll move our microscope into place. So on here, the furthest one to the right here is our negative, and this is our positive. So based on these are tiny little LEDs, and I don't have low temp melting solder, I sort of melt the plastic housings on these things a little bit, but it doesn't hurt them. So all we got to do is keep this into place, keep it from moving too bad. Get a little something on there, because I don't want to melt them LEDs too bad, otherwise they won't work. So that takes care of that. So our next little stage here is we're going to bend these little wires and get them ready for attachment. So we're going to be bending them at a 90-degree angle. And we're going to come in from the side. Get that little booger out of here. Oops. Very hard to work on stuff when you can't properly secure it or it won't move. Okay, that's our little wires attached to them. Get this out of the way. So now that the micro soldering is done, it's not the prettiest soldering I've done, but it's very difficult to do these little type of projects. So now the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be contouring these wires and securing them to the board so they don't get ripped off. Because as you can see, there's not a lot holding them on to begin with. So we're just going to massage these wires so they sit on the board. Just a little bit more. So they don't move. Of course, when these LEDs get lit up for a little while, they'll further harden that UV resin. So now for the wires, we're going to just sit them flat on the board here. We're going to do the same thing with them. We're going to put a little resin on there, just so it don't move. Okay. So what we got to do for that. So now we can take these wires, give them a little fold, give them another little fold, and squeeze it. So now they're hanging out back here. So now we'll prep the jack here to accept a resistor on the center pin. And then our ground. Now that the relay is out of there, I got more access to the ground strap. Okay. So now we can take our 330 ohm resistor, get one out of the package. Trim the one side of the light here, pretty short, something like that. And now we can just about attach that right to the center. We're going to be sticking it right in its little anal hole there. There's a little hole in the side of the connector here that'll slip right in. Ouch. Like that. And then we'll just take that and kind of move him over like that. Trim this a little bit. And then we'll get a little piece of heat shrink. Just for shits and giggles. Put them out to the side, and then we'll take our ground lead here. And we'll just fish them through the components here and give them a little extra. Give them a little snip. Take our positive lead. And we'll give them a little snip. Get that out of the way. Strip the wires. Tin them. Put our little heat shrink on. Our positive lead. Negative lead really don't matter, because he's going to go right on the side. that's that. So for this stuff here, we can just sort of tuck it out of the way. Use the components to hold the wire in place. Weave it in and out so they're not in the way. Like such. Now we can put this back together. So we'll get our base. He just sort of hangs out in here. And then wipe the screen off. Get my fingerprints off of it. Then we'll put our LCD panel back on. And our outer shell. And put our buttons back on. Put it in from the bottom. Snap in the bottom. Snap in the top. Put our screw back in. Now for the test. We got our backlight. We got our flashy LED. And of course, you'll probably want to know if it does receive caller ID. And it does. So I'll put up a picture of my name will be on the bottom. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.